Stakeholder Partnership Forum, or SPF, a consultative webinar series on building a better ATS for tomorrow. My name is Swietenia, and I am the Executive Director of Diverse Clean Action, and I am currently based in Indonesia. And as an environmental engineer, I direct a community and foundation to combat marine debris issues and other ocean conservation area. And today, I will be moderating ATSEA-2 STF with the theme of Sustaining Ecosystem Services in ATS region, focusing on climate change, marine, and land-based pollution. On behalf of the committee of ATSEA, I'd like to express our warmest regards for all the regional steering committee members, representatives of Arafura and Timor Seas countries, ranging from Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Australia, and of course, all of the distinguished stakeholders and participants. I am really proud for moderating this Stakeholder Partnership Forum, as we have super all-woman moderators on this week's SPF series. So make sure to check the details and register to all of the upcoming series, which you can find out more on the ATSEA Instagram account at program_ATSEA. Coming back on today's SPF webinar, the topic is climate change, marine, and land-based pollution. You will be listening more on this forum from the two amazing speakers, which are Dr. Johanna Johnson from C2O Pacific, Dr. Won-Tae Shin from Global Ocean Inc., and also joining with us to give the feedbacks are the two on-point panelists, who are Dr. Jose Padilla from UNDP and Professor Zainal Arifin from LIPI. And each one of them is streaming from different countries. This is so exciting. And before going more details on the profile, I just want to say again, and seeing all of you here, wow, it's so nice to be here to meet you, joining through Zoom, even though now we cannot meet in person, but everybody is live from all over the world. And I can understand if some of you maybe wants to send kisses to long-lost colleagues that you haven't met for maybe for the past 8 months or more, but I am informing you guys that this meeting is being recorded and currently live streamed on YouTube. To make this process smooth, the webinar host will be muting all participants, so you cannot unmute yourself unless appointed by the moderator, which is me. In the event that you would like to ask questions, you may click raise hand button on Zoom or type your questions directly on the chat box in the YouTube live chat. And don't forget to rename your Zoom participant name into your name/or-institution, or you can write it down on the YouTube's live chat section. By knowing your name and institution, we will make sure that today's ongoing discussion is inclusive and relatable for everyone. And for those of you who is confused on what institutions are you coming from, you can instead put your countries under your name. Okay, as we're just getting started, we are expecting more stakeholders joining this forum. So please feel free to spread the YouTube link to your colleagues, then have your coffee and drink aside to accompany you, as we are going to have a fruitful discussion non-stop for the next 2 hours. Moreover, we have daily quizzes and quote competition, which make your maybe caffeine, focus, agility, and social media skills can award you as the winner of exciting gifts from the ATSEA Secretariat. Make sure you are watching until the end of today's webinar to secure that quiz prizes. Other than being inspired to act more sustainably from the speakers, I believe you will be highlighting some takeaway messages from the speaker lineups. Side tips: while listening to the talks and being inspired, you can make some scratch on your notes, because you can make 1 or 2 quotes out of it, then post it on your Facebook account, tag ATSEA FB account or the Facebook account under the name Arafura and Timor is Ecosystem Action ATSEA-2. By posting the quote, you are joining the competition and may get the prizes delivered to your home as well. Maybe I can have the committee to share the screen about the quote competition so the participants can note it down on their own respective houses. Because I have a strong feeling that one of you today will be the winner of the best quote about ATSEA-2 project or the winner of the most liked post. And both of the quote winners will be announced on the upcoming 5th of November 2020, the last series of the webinar. Okay, Maybe we can have the screen later on, but make sure to note it down, put some quotes, and post it on your Facebook to join this quote competition. Okay, on the other hand, I know some of you may need all of the presentation materials to help you brainstorm the quote, or a proof of attendance to report back to your boss or lecturer so you can be more focused to get the knowledge or even the prizes. Therefore, please fill the questionnaire link at the questionnaire form, which the link is provided on the chat box below. And please fill the questionnaire form before the webinar ends. And there will be sending the materials right away through the emails. Without further ado, first, let's dive into the ATSEA-2 SPF values from the man behind the program himself, Mr. Dwi Aryoga Gautama. And I am inviting Mr. Yoga or Mas Yoga as the National Project Coordinator for ATSEA-2 Indonesia. Mas Yoga will deliver introductions on ATSEA program, objective of today's webinar, background and role of SPF, and also the projects of ATSEA on the activities related to climate change assessment, marine and land-based pollution. Hello, Mas Yoga.
Good morning, Swietenia. Thanks
for... Good morning. How are you?
Nice. It's a nice day today.
Okay, hand it over to you. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining the second days of our webinar, serial webinar in day 2. Today, I would like to introduce about the themes of the material of today. It's related to the climate change and the marine and land-based pollutions. Maybe we're gonna play a brief introduction about our project at sea itself. Please play the animations.
The Arafura and Timor Seas region, or ATS, is unique in terms of its ecology, geography, and socio-political structure. It is rich in resources and home to a vast array of natural wonders. Shared by Australia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste, this fertile corridor of tropical water connects the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This area provides the peoples of many nations with essential resources, while also stocking the world's oceans with biodiversity. Unfortunately, overfishing, marine and land-based pollution, loss of habitat, and the impacts of climate change create a major threat to most marine life in the region. This underlines the urgent need for collective regional action and transboundary management of economically important fish species, critical habitats, and marine megafauna. Therefore, in 2006, the ATS Expert Forum developed and submitted a bid to the Global Environment Facility, which came to be known as the Arafura and Timor Seas Ecosystem Action Program, or ATSEA. The initial phase was officially launched in 2010 and created a regional collaboration tasked with finding sustainable solutions for problems affecting coastal and marine resources in the region. In 2019, the second phase of ATSEA, known as ATSEA-2, has been adapted to take the collaboration and coordination in the ATS region a step further through the endorsement and implementation of a 10-year vision for the ATS, known as the Strategic Action Program. It is made up of 3 main components. The first component focuses on strengthening the regional and national collaboration mechanism and establishing a stakeholder partnership forum to facilitate implementation of priority actions and better participatory processes. The second component focuses on developing an ecosystem approach to the fisheries management plan, strengthening the implementation of Regional Plan of Action to combat IUU fishing, assessing marine and land-based pollution, establishing and supporting the management of marine protected areas, and developing a regional plan to enhance marine turtle protection. And the third component focuses on improving the monitoring of the ATS region and sharing knowledge gained from the project. Through the three components, ATSEA-2 aims to achieve its main objectives in the ATS to foster sustainable development in the region by improving the quality of life of its inhabitants through restoration, conservation, and sustainable management of marine coastal ecosystems for a better life. In terms of its ecology,
Yeah, I think that the video will cover all the project itself. So maybe you could next. In the next slide. So based on the priority area in at sea itself, it's covered for a country like in the video mentions. It's covered in the Arafura and the Timor Seas. Its Indonesia part is mostly in the Arafura in fisheries management area in 718, and small part in fisheries management in 573 in Timor Seas. And also there's covered a lot of space in North Australia and Timor-Leste and PNG. In this area, there is a 5 major priority that transboundary concern of among the country. In ATSEA, it's we want to based on the assessment of the ATSEA-1 and the ATSEA-2, its implementation, it's more about the strategic action plans related to the assessment. There's a 5 major priority. One is related to unsustainable fisheries. It's talking about the IUU fisheries in the transboundary area. And then also talking about the modification, degradation, and lost habitat. It's mentioned that there is a lot of degradation on the mangrove area, coral reef, and also the seagrass. And the other issue is related to the marine and land-based pollutions. We know that in Timor Seas, there is a lot of consensus of the offshore oil and gas block in the area, and it's have a high risk that will high risk of impact to the waters. It's happening in 10 years ago. So starting from the lesson learned from 10 years ago, the ATSEA-2 trying to strengthening how to manage the risk assessment for the future related to the marine and land-based pollutions. And the other issues talking about the climate change impact. We know that it's a lot of the area is a small island. There is also have a high risk vulnerable impact from these issues, and how this program will adapt to the strategic planning in the government, and not just in the national government. It's also how to intervention in the province and the district levels. And the last one is the issues related to the key species loss. One of the major critical habitat in ATS is sea turtle. There is a rookery ground within the area, and sea turtle goes to among the country to Indonesia and Timor-Leste, and also goes to the Australia. And then the ATSEA-2 manage the species within the regional level, and also implemented in the national plan of action for the species itself in each country. And the next. Maybe the next. Okay, so based on the issue, there is a main strategy that will be interventions. One is talking about the governance, how, and then the ATSEA-2 strengthening the ASEF as the initiator of the programs to be developed more broader to another key stakeholder, and also how to manage the regional and national mechanism related to this area. And then Component 2 is talking about more technical related to improving LME carrying capacity to sustain provision, regulation, and supporting ecosystem services. It's talking about the fisheries, marine pollution, MPA, and also how to integrate it, coastal management, linked with also the adaptation of the climate change. And the third component is talking about the knowledge management. It's mentioned that the program should be giving a lot of knowledge to the local government and also the national government. So it's not a project-based, it's continue as a program, and its needs among the country. Within the ATSEA itself, we have a 23 target output. It will be described. You could check in the websites. Next. Talking about the stakeholder partnership forums is the next phase of the former ATS expert forum or ATSEF. It's already described on detail in day one, the first day of the webinar. But this is one of this in ATSEA-2 is triggered to strengthening the ATSEF become the stakeholder partnership forum or SPF. It should be consist of four components. One is consists of the government representative, and then the private sector, civil society. It's mentioned like an NGO, women organizations, because we're talking also about the gender interventions, and also academic and scientific institutions. Next. And then the main objective of the SPF itself, it's mentioned on the SAP document or strategic action program. This is 10 years programs, but it's still, instead of it starting 2012, but it's still relevant to be used until now. So we know that what is the needs of the transboundary objective and where is the position of SPF to contribute to strengthening the management in the area. And the next. And this is the agenda for the themes for 4 days webinar. We are in the day 2. We are gonna talk specifically related to the climate change and the marine pollutions. The climate change will be presented by Dr. Johanna, and the marine pollution will be presented by Dr. Won-Tae Shin. And maybe you could join in the other webinar, the day 3 and day 4, or you could also see in the YouTube channels. Next.
Okay, your time is only 1 minute left, Mr. Yoga.
Yeah, so it's only 2 slides. And the main of discussion today related to climate change, there is only 2 main objectives. One, how to improve knowledge of climate change impact and implementations. 2 is how to develop integrated coastal management expanded to the climate change, specifically in Rotendao and also in Bariki Posto in Timor-Leste. And next, for the marine pollutions, we're gonna discuss related to regional pollution hotspot assessment and how to develop the marine pollution task force oil spill response training and regional exchange among Rotendao and also in Municipio Covalima in Timor-Leste. So it's in regional level, and in national level will be developed the same task force. Next. Yeah, that's for introduction from us. We hope you could get further information in our website. You could click and program ATSEA.com. Thank you for the time. Back to you, Swietenia.
Okay, thank you, Mas Yoga. It was a really great start. It's surely reminding us all on how the ATSEA platform started and what actually is the purpose of today's and the series of the webinar. Also, it also gives such a strong urgency message to discuss more on sustainable action on climate change, marine and land-based pollution issues in the region now for the future. Okay, before we dive in with the topic, as Mas Yoga briefly mentioned, you should check out the ATSEA Facebook account because I'd like to reminding all of you to join our quote competitions. Maybe the committee can share the screen on how to join the quote competitions. And while we're waiting for the screen, I'd like to reminding you, every participant, to rename your Zoom account into your name / or - your institutions. And if you are confused on what institutions are you representing on, you can instead put your countries aside your name. Okay, and if we're talking about the quote competitions, you can simply post maximum up to 2 quotes on your Facebook account. And don't forget to tag the ATSEA Facebook account, which is under the name Arafura and Timor Sea's Ecosystem Action, or ATSEA-2. And there will be 2 winner categories, which are the best quote about ATSEA-2 project and the most liked post. And the winner will be announced at the 4th day of this webinar, which is the last day, on 5th November 2020. Okay, make sure to screenshot it or take a picture from your phone or note it down on your notes, and we are waiting for your wonderful quotes. Thank you for the screen. And I'm also going to remind all of you to fill out the questionnaire form, which the link is already posted in the chat box. And for those of you who joined through YouTube, you can also see it on the live chat, or there is no late terms on joining the Zoom meetings. Okay. And again, I'm reminding you, this is such a flexible discussions. We are going to have the first speaker and then the panelists to give the feedbacks. The first topics we'll be discussing is the climate change, and then following into the marine and land-based pollutions. And after the feedbacks for the second topic, we're going to have the question and answer sessions. So for those of you who already have the questions, feel free to just type it down on the chat box on Zoom or YouTube live chat. Or if you want to say it directly, you can grab our attention by putting or clicking the raise hand button on Zoom. Okay, without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce and greet the first speaker and panelists on board, which is a wonderful woman. We will have Dr. Johanna Johnson, the Director of C2O Pacific, who will present her perspective on climate change vulnerability assessment on the preliminary results. Dr. Johanna Johnson is the Director and Senior Scientist at C2O Pacific with 25 years experience working in applied ecosystem science, particularly on climate change, implication for tropical marine ecosystem, and community-based natural resource management. She has a bachelor degree from Monash University, and then the master degree on James Cook University, or GCU, and PhD in climate change vulnerability assessment in the same university. Johanna has spent 15 years specializing in assessing climate change vulnerability and developing tools to operationalize the concept into practical adaptations for communities and intersectors throughout the Asia-Pacific region. And she has worked and lived in Vanuatu since 2015. Good morning, Dr. Johanna.
Good morning, and thank you for such a lovely introduction. Nice to see everyone's smiling faces from all over the region and the world.
So you have 20 minutes, and I will be reminding you for the last 2 minutes before it ends. Hand it over to you, Dr. Jo. Thank you.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk to us about the climate change vulnerability assessment under ATSEA-2. Oh, good, the slides are coming. So this is part of the, I guess, component 2, understanding what climate change implications are for marine resources, including habitats and species in the ATS region. If I could have the next slide. So I'm just going to cover a bit of background because this is building on other projects and work in the region and nearby regions that I have been either leading or involved in. Give you some brief information about the method, how far I've got so far with the assessment, some of the challenges, next steps, and then direct some of you who have an interest and have some expertise in this area to an online survey where we are collecting some expert information for the vulnerability assessment. So you've already seen the map this morning in that wonderful video about the ATSEA-2 project of the ATS region. For the purposes of this vulnerability assessment, I have broken it into 4 subregions because these are more manageable subregions in order to do assessments. But importantly, while I recognize that habitats and species move across these borders, the actual ways of managing activities in these areas and for implementing things like marine protected areas and conservation measures and management measures are very much based on jurisdictions. So we've broken it into these 4 subregions, which will then influence not just the assessment and the results from the assessment, but also the recommendations for adaptation measures to minimize vulnerability. And so we have the Timor Sea subregion, the Arafura Sea subregion, the Northern Australia subregion, and the Gulf of Carpentaria subregion. And as you know, the small part there you can see of Western Province in Papua New Guinea is also part of the Arafura Sea subregion. As I said, I've been working in this space for a long time, and I've actually led or been involved in a number of vulnerability assessments for marine areas that either overlap or are adjacent to the ATS region. So there was a Northern Australia climate change vulnerability assessment for habitats and fisheries resources that covered the Northern Australia and also the Gulf of Carpentaria. That was led by a colleague of mine, David Welch, and I was involved in that. I also co-led a Pacific vulnerability assessment, again, looking at habitats and fisheries species in the Pacific, which included the Papua New Guinea species and habitats, and also in the Torres Strait. I led and worked with David Welch again on an assessment of habitats and fisheries species in the Torres Strait. And so you can see that there is already some overlap and some adjacent areas where there is a lot of work already, a lot of information. And so this assessment will build on that. We will draw on the findings of those previous studies. We will obviously update the information because some of these are now 5 years old or 6 years old. And so we want the latest information about habitats, about management, about species. But we will use the same methods so that it is complementary with these previous studies. Next slide, please. So the method or the structured framework that I am applying for this part of the project is comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a fairly well-known framework, and some of you may have seen this before. It has components for exposure and sensitivity. So that's exposure to climate change, so climate variability and extremes. The sensitivity to that change or that climate variability to give you a measure of potential impacts. And that's obviously important when considering management and the future management and how resources might be impacted. But then I also factor in the adaptive capacity. And adaptive capacity can be of the ecosystem, so it can be an ecological adaptive capacity, but it can also be social. So obviously communities, management, governments can adapt, can put in place adaptations. And so it takes into account the adaptive capacity of the system to give you an ultimate result that assesses vulnerability. And that's really important for informing what your adaptation options should be. So making recommendations about the most effective adaptation options that can be implemented, but importantly, what those drivers of vulnerability are. So you can actually look back at the results of the assessment to understand whether it's high exposure that is driving vulnerability or high sensitivity that is driving vulnerability or low adaptive capacity. So really targeting adaptations and those recommendations to the certain factors, the specific things that drive vulnerability in the region. Next slide, please. So the method has been evolving over the many years that we've been applying it. We actually first applied it, and I led an initiative in the Great Barrier Reef back starting in 2005 to assess the vulnerability of the Great Barrier Reef ecosystems and industries to climate change. using that same structured framework. But over the years, now 15 years, it's evolved into a 10-step method, and a lot of this is published. So at the bottom of some of my slides, you will see references. Please look those up if you're interested, or talk to me if you want more information. But the 10-step process is very structured, and we found it to be really effective in the other studies that I've already referred to. So we have applied it to a number of large marine ecosystems, such as the Great Barrier Reef, Northern Australia, the entire Pacific region, which includes 22 island nations. And you work through the 10 steps, starting from your setting your management objectives, which obviously for ATSEA-2 are already documented, so that's really useful. Selecting which parts of the system to assess, and we've now done this for this project in the ATS region. Having indicators and criteria to assess vulnerability, so that in steps 3 to 6, it's very structured and it's semi-quantitative. So it's actually an automated analysis. You then can do a sensitivity analysis to look back at your results and see if any one indicator is disproportionately affecting the results, and potentially review and reassess in step 8. And then ultimately we prioritize based on importance, and that is social and economic and cultural importance, to provide these recommendations for management that are very targeted at minimizing those drivers of vulnerability for these highly important resources. Next slide, please. So the benefits of using this approach, and as I said, we've been using it now for a number of years in a number of different large marine ecosystems, is it is semi-quantitative. So you get very clear relative ranking results, and it's really applicable to these large spatial areas over time. So we can look into the future 10 years if we want, we can look into the future 20 years. The climate projections are actually totally up to the project to select. In the case of ATSEA-2, we are looking at 50 years in the future. So what are the climate projections for 2070? So it's really easy to apply to the spatial and temporal scale that we're dealing with here in the ATS region. Next point. It is building, as I said, on previous assessments in Northern Australia, Gulf of Carpentaria, PNG and the Torres Strait. So we are going to learn from that, and we've actually got a bit of a head start, which is really important. Next point. It's very participatory. We do have a couple of parts of those in those 10 steps where experts, managers, practitioners and communities can get involved and really draw on local experiences and local knowledge. And as I said at the end, I'll give you some links to some online surveys for those of you who are experts in the area and would like to be part of this participatory assessment. The assessment uses a range of data as inputs to the analysis, published data, obviously, unpublished data where people are willing to share either draft reports or raw data, maps, things like that, as well as this expert elicitation and local knowledge. Next point. Importantly, while we are assessing a large marine area, which obviously has habitats and species and is a connected ecosystem, we obviously need to consider the social components of vulnerability. And the assessment very much is an integrated social and ecological assessment, and we do use social data as part of the analysis. And this is where things like the expert elicitation and local knowledge is so important for that social data. Next point, please. I'll be using the latest climate change projections as an input for the exposure component, and that's to 2070 under a high emissions scenario. So what was RCP 8.5 and is now SSPS 8.5. Next point. It's an automated analysis, as I said, and it delivers very objective ranked results that can then inform your recommendations for adaptation. Next point. And then the prioritization, as I said, focuses your management effort on those parts of the system, those resources, those industries, those habitats that are most important from a cultural, economic or social point of view. Next point. And as I said, we drill back down in the results and recommend actions or adaptations that address these main drivers of vulnerability. Next point. So the method itself, as I said, is automated. It's a fairly complex formula, but we've now got a tool that we use in inputting the data, and then it provides a result. No need to look, I guess, at this in great detail, other than to say that the exposure indicators are based on the climate change projections. And in the case of the ATS region, we are using a high emissions scenario looking at 2070. So the projections in 50 years' time. The indicators for sensitivity are known or observed ecological responses of species and habitats. And so this is where building on existing studies in overlapping areas or nearby areas is really important, because we can draw on these known ecological responses that have been, in some cases, documented in experiments or in the field. And then the adaptive capacity really considers both social and ecological factors that either promote adaptive capacity or might actually hinder the ability of systems, habitats, resources, industries, fisheries and the like to adapt. And then all of this information is put into this automated analysis, and we have this formula that you can see down the bottom there to give us our results. Next. So as I've said, we've already determined what habitats and species will be assessed. So that's the components being assessed for the ATS large marine ecosystem. There was a really extensive list that we started with for each of the 4 sub-regions, and by working with the ATSEA-2 team, and thank you everyone for your support here on that, as well as with experts in the different countries, we've actually managed to bring that down to a manageable list of fisheries, species that have key ecological roles or have some sort of species of conservation interest, as well as habitats that will be assessed during the project. Next point. So, the final list, and I'll show you those for each of the 4 sub-regions, includes species of conservation interest, fisheries species that have a high annual catch rate or value, species that are identified for potential future exploitation. So we considered some of those in some of the regions as well, in case that grows into the future, given that we are looking at projections for 50 years from now. And also a range of other biota, so crustaceans, marine mammals, sharks, sea cucumbers as well. We also are looking at 5 different habitats for all 4 of the subregions, and that includes your shallow coral reefs, so less than 40 meters in depth, seagrass meadows, mangroves, deep reefs, so reefs greater than 40 meters, obviously beyond that photic zone, and then the open ocean or pelagic habitats. Next slide, please. So in Indonesia, Arafura Sea, this is the species list of 26 species that will be assessed. So we have the 5 habitats everywhere, as well as these species lists you'll see now. You can see there's quite an extensive fisheries species list, as well as quite a number of species of conservation interest, including dugongs, 2 species of turtle, a number of species of shark. And then these other species, these are species that are either planned for future exploitation or are currently maybe not exploited, but this may increase into the future. Next slide. For Timor-Leste, we have a list of 24 species. And again, there was a lot of consultation with the team and within the team, as well as with fisheries officers and other managers in the countries to come up with this final list of 24 species for Timor-Leste and for all of the sub-regions. So you can see these lists here, and happy to discuss any of this in detail offline if people are interested. Next slide, please. For Western Papua New Guinea, as I said, we've actually done an assessment through the Pacific Regional Assessment of all of the habitats and many species in Papua New Guinea already. But for this one, it's such a small area, this Western province of PNG, and there's only a small number of species that are really important in this small area. And you can see that there's 7 species that will be assessed here, including fishery species, 3 species of conservation interest, dugong turtle and white-tipped reef shark, and then black teatfish, which is not currently exploited because it's meant to be closed, but we know there's poaching and we know there's obviously a great market for this in nearby Asian countries. And then, yes, next slide, please. For Northern Australia and the Gulf of Carpentaria, two very large areas that were assessed 5 years ago, and we are going to update those assessments and rerun them for these 27 species that you see here. And again, a lot of fishery species, quite a number of species of conservation interest, and then 2 of these other species, which again are species that are not currently exploited, but there may be in the future. Next slide, please. So the data that's been collected so far have a lot of the latest climate change projections for 2070 under this high emissions scenario, also have some of them for a medium emissions scenario, which is RCP 4.5, although we are tracking along this high emissions scenario, so we'll probably focus more on those projections. Some of the latest you see here is the sea surface temperature projections that have come from NOAA. That were literally run a few weeks ago, and that shows you the increase in sea surface temperatures from 2015 to 2070. We've also got this data for pH, or ocean acidification, and we will have some more regional data, so not downscaled quite so small to this 2-kilometre resolution that you see on this map, for other variables like sea level rise, ENSO, storms and cyclones, salinity, solar radiation. We've also been very kindly given some latest climate change projections from BMKG, so the Indonesian Met Services, who have been now working with the project to deliver projections for 2070 for air temperature and rainfall. They did have projections for 2050, and we asked if they would rerun them for a different time frame, and they agreed to do this, and we're really appreciative of that. While they haven't been mapped, they will be available as maps, and I'll show you an example of what they might look like very soon. So that's really great that we've been able to collaborate with the Indonesian Met Services. And we're also just recently getting access to the location of habitats and details on their conditions. We are working through a range of species life history data. So this is this sensitivity information. How do species respond to different climate variables? What are their known thresholds? What are their known requirements for things like spawning and growth? And we will have these for each of the species as a resource, but also as input for the vulnerability assessment. And we've started to access a lot of the fishery status and catch data. And obviously there's again some citations down the bottom there, because we're building on some existing projects or previous projects. And I'm collaborating with my colleague, David Welch, for assistance with access to that data and these species profiles, because he's a fisheries specialist in these areas. Next one. So this is an example of the sort of data that BMKG has been providing. This is their 2050 projections, but they've now done this for 2070 for rainfall and air temperature. So that'll be a really useful exposure input, and we appreciate the delivery of that data and that rerun for us. Next slide. So far the project is on track. October just gone, and now we're into November. We are continuing our data collection. We have most of the projections we need. We have just today received online access to the habitat maps and condition, and a lot of the species movements data from another project you'll hear about tomorrow, the Marine Spatial Planning project that's part of ATSEA-2. And we appreciate again that data sharing, very important. Best data you can get means the analysis and the assessment gives you better results. Working on species profiles, and as I said, this collecting data or information from experts through this online survey that I will share the link at the end. Once I have all the data, I'll be able to run the automated vulnerability assessment. I'm hoping later this month, but we may sneak into December. It just depends how long it takes to get all of the data that's needed. Also doing a prioritization with the ATSEA-2 team and experts in terms of the social, economic and cultural importance of species. And I'll be able to share the preliminary results probably early December. And then next year, having shared these preliminary results, gotten any comments or feedback, can finalise the results and provide some guidance on using them and also communicating the outputs. Next slide. So as I said, I am on track. I've done about 5 of the 8 project outputs have started or are completed. That includes obviously a review of all the available climate change information and similar projects in the region and nearby regions, finalise the species list, getting data collected, obviously doing the species profiles and the expert elicitation. October, November, I'll continue with all of this particular data collection and species profile and the online expert survey, and expecting to have all the final project outputs, which is a vulnerability assessment report, some guidance for some decision making using the recommendations, and some presentation and communication materials. And they're planned for early next year. Next slide, please.
Okay, Dr. Johanna, your time is only 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm almost finished. If I could have the next slide, please. So some of the challenges has been just standardizing all of the outputs and also the data that I'm using as inputs for the analysis, because some things are very small scale, some things very big scale, some things are available in some areas and not others. So trying to standardize those so that the outputs and the results make sense and are usable has been a challenge that I continue to work with. Also, in some places, there is very limited data, or, it's very different to the data in other sub-regions. So working through that, because it's important for the analysis that I address some of these challenges. Next point, please. You can bring them all up, please. The next steps will be obviously to finalise the review, in particular the final climate change projections that we've just received from BMKG. Continue collecting the data, finalise these species profiles, which are in the inputs for sensitivity. Next points, please. Run the assessment for all 5 habitats and the different species in the 4 subregions, and then get some preliminary results. Yeah, and share them with everyone. You can have the next slide. So as I said, for those of you interested, we are going through currently an expert elicitation process, and there is an online survey for the Arafura or Indonesian subregion and also the Timor Sea subregion. It is drawing on local knowledge and expertise from a range of people. So if you feel that you are in this role, a manager, a fisher, a scientist, a decision maker, please look at these links and maybe consider sharing your expertise. You don't need to do it for every species or habitat, just those that you are familiar with or you know very well. It does help fill in gaps where we don't have a lot of published literature or reports or even draft reports. And it really, the better the data and the more we have, the better the inputs to the vulnerability assessment. And you can see from our little turtle here that really published reports give us only about 30% of what I need for the assessment, unpublished about 15%, the projections about 20%, and this expert elicitation process about 35%. So the more people who participate, the better for the assessment. Next slide, please. Sorry, next point. Oh, yeah, sorry, could you go back just one? Sorry. So down the bottom under the turtle now, you can see the links for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. They are 2 different surveys because we are assessing different species. And it depends how much of an expert you are. If you only are familiar with one habitat or one species, it probably will only take you 5 minutes to complete the survey because you only need to answer for those things you're familiar with. If you know lots about lots of habitats or species, it might take you a bit longer, but I encourage anyone who feels that they might be able to share their expertise with us to please go to these links and fill them in for whichever sub-region you are working in or you are familiar with. And next slide is just a thank you, everyone. I have included my email address here if you have any questions or if you'd like access to any other resources.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Johanna Johnson. I love how you can explain how to assess such a complex issue in such a comprehensive way and systematically in under 20 minutes. Applause for you. It shows that the climate change efforts needs collaborative and systemic works. But with all of the preliminary study results, cases, and challenges and recommendations, I am going to pass it on Dr. Jose Padilla to give his experts feedbacks or inputs moving forward in the region of ATSEA in the topic of climate change. And for those of you who don't know, Jose Padilla is the Regional Technical Advisor for Water and Oceans with the Nature, Climate and Energy team of UNDP since 2010. And he is based with the UNDP Bangkok Regional Hub and covers the entire Asia-Pacific region. He has initiated and or collaborated with national and regional institutions to formulate projects, programs in the area of large marine ecosystem management, fisheries management, coastal pollution, marine biodiversity conservation, and climate change adaptations. And he obtained his PhD on economics from Simon Fraser University, Canada in 1991, and subsequently undertook a postdoctoral fellow with the World Fish Center, which formerly International Center for Living Aquatic Resources Management. All right, with such an expertise, Dr. Jose, please give your feedbacks in the next 10 minutes. I pass the microphone to you. Dr. Jose, are you there? Okay, while we're waiting, I hope that the committee will also paste the link that Dr. Johanna mentioned earlier on the questionnaire link for Indonesian and also Timor-Leste regional. Yeah, so you can help to address the data or your feedbacks into the links that Dr. Johanna mentioned earlier on her slides. Okay, checking again. Dr. Jose, are you there?
Yes, I'm here now.
Okay, awesome. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Ibu, and thank you for that kind introduction. And also thank you, Dr. Johanna, for that comprehensive presentation. I'm glad that the work is progressing. I just would like to inform the participants that UNDP and the GF have been initiating work on assessing the impacts of climate change in their international waters portfolio. And this is one of the few initiatives. I think there was one that was done for Pacific tuna, but that is a species-specific work. And this one that we are undertaking for ATSEA-2 is for the entire large marine ecosystem. So while I should not start with an excuse that I am not really a biophysical scientist, let me just offer some observations that we can discuss later on during the open forum or bilaterally with Dr. Johanna. First of all, I'd like to comment on the sub-region approach, and finer granularity is good by dividing the entire Arafura and Timor Sea into 4 sub-regions. I think that is good because there may be a wide variation in the projections of the climate data up to 2070. However, I am not sure if we are foregoing something here. There may be benefits to an LMA-wide approach or analysis, particularly if we are considering transboundary species. And in the species list that was shown to us, turtles, I presume they are moving around the 4 countries, the littoral countries in the Arafura and Timor Sea, and changing climate variables over time might affect their movement. Moreover, going back to the granularity, one of the expectations I would, at least for myself and for the project, is that the results from this seminal work is going to be used in formulating adaptation approaches at the local level in the sites, namely in the southern part of Timor-Leste and the islands of Indonesia. So it is important that the work will go beyond the species level work, but also into what may be useful for community-based adaptation interventions. Now, as looking on the methodology, following the IPCC framework is good. And I'm looking at one of the slides here on the assessment method that list the climate change projections for some climate variables, including air and sea temperatures, rainfall, ocean pH, cyclones, salinity, etc. I was wondering if sea level rise could be included if it's not yet captured in any of the climate variables enumerated in this slide. The reason being that probably sea level rise would be of utmost importance at the community or at the site level. The projections that are being used, according to Dr. Johnson, is the high emission scenario for 2070. Again, I was wondering if we can do some sensitivity analysis against these projections, noting that there's a lot of uncertainty with respect to the success of the UNFCCC convention with respect to emission targets and so on. Is it possible that the high emission scenario will be bridged in the upward direction as we move forward? Again, there's also that the advocacy by coastal states, in particular by SIDS, about a 1.5 degree increase in global temperatures from the pre-industrial era. Okay, the other point I'd like to raise, and some sensitivity here, and maybe I should just mention as well, that while covering Australia is good, you know that there are sensitivities with respect to the use of GF funds. And Australia is not eligible. However, I would recommend covering Australia for transboundary species like turtles and other species of conservation interest. We can discuss this outside of this meeting. And lastly, the other point I'd like to raise is a potential collaboration in undertaking this study. There is an attempt to involve experts through that survey. And I was wondering if at some point in time, the academic institutions, leading academic institutions in Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and possibly Papua New Guinea could be involved through the support of the project. I think it is important to aspire for like a transfer or capacity building of these institutions who could carry on the work forward beyond the life of this project. So overall, I'd like to thank Dr. Johanna for the excellent progress she has made, and from not only from UNDP and from the project, I think other global stakeholders, including the donor, the Global Environment Facility, are looking forward to the results of this activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jose. What a fruitful feedbacks and insights. I think we still have time, so we can have Dr. Johanna to respond for the next 5 minutes. Yeah, go ahead. Please unmute yourself first. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Jose, for your great comments and feedback. I appreciate, you know, how the context is really important for everyone involved in the bigger project. So it's really good for me to hear that feedback, and I appreciate it a lot. I was taking notes as you were speaking so that I can respond to you. I guess, first of all, the spatial subunits are a practical thing for the input of the data, and also for when we're providing recommendations. However, I absolutely acknowledge that many of the species are transboundary, particularly species of conservation interest. And in fact, for those species, a lot of the data we have in terms of their area that they use, the habitats they depend on, their movements, actually crosses all of those sub-regions anyway. So we are very aware of this, and I will be considering that when it comes time to review the results and provide recommendations about where their vulnerability might be coming from. We'll be considering their movement. So while we have these spatial subunits, just for practicality purposes and for some of the recommendations, it will be important to consider jurisdictions. It's not going to limit the outputs or the sorts of adaptations and recommendations that might come from the study. So I guess we're doing both, if you like, where it's relevant, and very aware of that. Also, when we talk about how the results might be able to inform community-based adaptation, there will be this guide that I referred to on using the results to support decision-making, and that will consider local community-level decision-making, acknowledging that some of the information obviously will be delivered at a higher spatial scale, but there'll be a way to use it with some additional, obviously, participatory work with communities and with, district governments and things like that to inform local community-based adaptation. So it'll be in the guide. It might have some next steps, obviously, to be able to just make decisions about community-based adaptation, because obviously that is a very participatory process to do well. I have done a lot of that in Solomon Islands, in PNG, in Vanuatu, and having the information is the first step. Working with communities is the next step, but there'll be some discussion of that in the guidance of how the results can help inform that.
Okay.
In terms of the method, sea level rise is included. Possibly I used a short term for it, SLR, so apologies if that wasn't clear, but it definitely is included and in the assessment, so that's good. And so is the medium or moderate emissions scenario. While I said, we're focusing on RCP 8.5, and that is where we are tracking right now, which is why I've made sure we have those projections. We have projections in most cases for the moderate emissions and can easily run them both and perhaps make some comment about how they are different, or for which species it makes a big difference to really curb emissions and end up on that moderate trajectory instead of the high emissions trajectory. So we will still be looking at the moderate emissions one. It's just that right now we're tracking at that high 8.5. I totally recognise what you say about GEF funding not being applicable in Australia. And the Australian species do cross boundaries. The recommendations will be very much, again, cognizant of that. And any other recommendations will be something that we would not expect ATSEA-2 to fund, obviously, under the GEF funding. So you're very aware of all of that, and are happy to discuss it further offline as you suggest. And then finally, in terms of collaboration, I just want to say that absolutely open always to collaboration. You may have noticed in my presentation that already in getting projections and getting information on fisheries and ecology of fisheries, that I've been collaborating with NOAA and the University of Miami, with the BMKG, and also with David Welch, who's a fisheries specialist who's done these sorts of assessments before. So I'm always open for collaboration, and if there is a way to do that with national institutions or academic institutions, then yes, very happy to explore that.
Okay, Dr. Johanna, thank you for your feedbacks. I love how you also urge the collaborations from all of the stakeholders, not only that listed on your presentations, and you also say the importance of local community-based approach. So I'd like to urge everyone here who join through YouTube or Zoom, please feel free to write it down, your questions, insights, or feedbacks, or you can simply fill out the questionnaire form, which is provided on the chat box. Okay, I think that was a great discussion and such a heavy one for the beginning, but we will be hearing more a presentation from Dr. Won-Tae Shin entitled Assessment on Marine and Land-Based Pollution. Dr. Shin has been working on international or regional organizations governments and research institutes on coastal and ocean issues and management in the East Asian countries since 2011. Aside from current ATSEA project consultancy on marine and land-based pollution assessment, he is also working on COICA projects such as ICM and oil spill response in Vietnam and aquaculture development in the Philippines. Prior to joining ATSEA as a program specialist in 2007, Dr. Shin has worked for the government of RO Korea as an office of the Ministry of Ocean and Fisheries. In 2011, he established a consulting firm in RO Korea for expanding services to various entities. He has received his master's and PhD degrees in environmental engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology, Atlanta, USA, and as of 2020, which he holds a residency. And worry note, for those of you who has already raised your hands and asked the questions, we will have the question and answer sessions after we hear from Dr. Shin, and we will get his feedback of presentation as well from the panelists ahead. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Shin into the podium. Hello.
Thank you very much, Tania. Thank you very much for warm introduction.
Okay,
let me share my presentation. Okay, today my topic is marine and land-based pollution assessment at ATSEA region. Okay, this LME concept has been developed in the early 2000, and the key personnel is Ken Sherman. I met him in 2014. He's quite old, and I hope he's still alive. And then this concept was adopted by UNDP, and then UNDP secured funds and from Jeff, and then implementing several LME projects around the world. Now, ATSEA is one of the program, and then has been quite successful at the first phase. And then we are now moving into the second phase. The LME concept has like 5 modules. And then these modules are all very similar to all other LME projects. The primary purpose is to reduce coastal pollution, restore damaged habitat, and recover depleted fisheries stock. Now, the outcome of the project is a TDA, transboundary diagnostic analysis and strategic action program, which ATSEA-1 project has been developed in 2011. Now we are moving into implementation of the strategic action program of ATSEA. And ATSEA, as now, we can summarize like this. ATSEA is a highly productive marine ecosystem, producing more than 300 grams carbon per square meter per year. So this extremely rich in living and non-living marine resources, including major fisheries and oil and gas reserves, produce large and small scale fisheries resources. So many people depending on fisheries as their livelihoods. But the problem is that we are overexploiting the ecosystem. So over the past several centuries, many of the Indonesian coral reefs have been heavily and chronically overfished. This is one of the biggest problem in ATSEA region. And overexploited stock include many species of reef fish, such as groupers, and threatened and endangered species, such as sea turtle and dugong. Because of when the fishing is heavy, you will lose fishing gears, and then cost the fishing very active. And then species like turtle and dugongs are dying due to entanglement and ship strikes. And then ATSEA, there are many oil rigs. So there are huge risk of oil pollution and oil fish, overfishing and marine debris, including direct fishing gears. So lots of fishing gears are lost during the fishing. So we can summarize the ATSEA in one table. Karen Susan Edivani and Shane Penny studied ATSEA region. And then if you can see this table, population, Indonesian side is like 70%, and Timor-Leste 22%, Papua New Guinea 1%, and Australia like 6%. But the fishing number of fishers is like 98% coming from Indonesia, and the fish catch 98%. So Indonesia is heavily depending on the fishery in the ATSEA region. And then global community, a bunch of scientists, try to assess ocean health. We call it Ocean Health Index. As you can see, there are many categories, but if we can see a clean water goal, which comprises 4 targets: nutrients, pathogens, chemicals, and trash. ATSEA scores between 50 to 75, and when the global average is a 71. This varies because of the country-based. This is a country-based assessment, which means that they assess Indonesia as a whole, and then Australia as a whole, and then Papua New Guinea as a different country. So this cannot be applied to ATSEA region, but if we mean up, then ATSEA is between 50 to 75. So in the ATSEA-1 project, TDA was developed in 2001, and then they identify several pollution sources. What we can see here, many sources of pollution, but significant sources we can identify are oil spill and marine debris, including direct fishing gears. As you can see in ATSEA ecosystem, there are lots of marine protected area, and actually in Australian side, there are huge numbers of marine protected area, and then large areas are covered by MPAs. And then there are fishing ground and then aquaculture areas, and mostly in Indonesia. And then we have whale shark and turtle and whales passing these seas. So these seas, ATSEA is quite abundant in ecosystem. And as I said, as one of the source of pollution is oil spill. And then the reason being is that there are so many oil drilling activities currently ongoing in Joint Petroleum Development Area. We have Greater Sunrise and Bayo Undan and Greater Poseidon and other so many oil drilling activity is already ongoing. And then there are pipeline passing through this area. So significantly posing threats to ATSEA ecosystem. And in 2009, there are big oil spill incident happened in ATSEA region. There's a Montara wellhead platform incident in 2009. Montara wellhead is located between Rote and Dao and the northwest Australian coast. It's like 250 kilometers away. And then the rig had a problem, and then discharged oil and gas for like 75 days, and then leaked up to 9 million gallons of oils and gas into the area, and like 6,000 square kilometer of the area. As you can see, the oil spill happened in this Timor Sea area. So in Australia, there's national oil spill contingency plan already set up at the time. So the activation was the national plan was activated and then managed by ATSEA, and then they do the response measures. But after 11 years, still there are lawsuits going on. 15,000 Indonesian seaweed farmers filed a lawsuit last year. After 11 years, still lawsuit going on. That means something wrong there because of the assessment and response measures. And then the oil companies, claim that the oil spill was not that expanded to Indonesian waters, but the Indonesian farmer claimed that they felt the damage. So there are a dispute going on, and then after 11 years, it was not settled. There's something very wrong. So why this happens? In Australian side, National Marine Oil Spill Contingency Plan is divided by the 3 nautical miles. Within 3 nautical miles, ATSEA is responsible for the cleanup and response of the oil spill. But beyond 3 miles, rig platforms and pipeline, relevant oil companies should respond to the oil spill. So, if the oil company didn't respond to that oil spill in other Indonesia or Timor-Leste area, the oil spill might reach there and then damage the habitats. I think that's the reason there. So, oil spill contingency plan at ATSEA region is that Australia established in 1973 and managed by ATSEA. For Indonesia, National Oil Spill Contingency Plan was established in 2006 and launched in 2007. And then the Montara incident happened in 2009. So I believe that at the time, Indonesia was not ready for responding to that incident. So I don't know this at this time, how ready for that oil spill response. And Timor-Leste, not yet established, and Papua New Guinea, not yet established. So, when the oil spill happened at ASEAN region, all 4 countries should respond together. So it is recommended that a regional contingency plan, oil spill contingency plan should be established so that the oil response resources can be more mobilized in transboundary manner. Because responding to oil spill, it needs resources. Response materials are quite expensive and heavy. So we need to mobilize from Australia to Indonesia and Papua New Guinea or Timor-Leste. So responding to oil spill requires environmental sensitivity mapping, because when there's an oil spill happening, we need a ESI map so that we can prioritize where to mobilize our resources first. So we have a limited resources. Where are the most sensitive area and where we need to mobilize those resources. So we have ESI mapping need to be done. So our colleague in Indonesia, actually, I'm happy to see Aryo here, and he he studied South Sumatra area, and then developed the ESI mapping there. So, actually, you have a capacity to develop a ESI mapping in Indonesia. So what I'm doing at this consultancy is developing a ESI map at Rote Endau in Indonesia, and I will expand this to southern coast of Timor-Leste later. So this map is necessary to prioritize the mobilization of the resources. Okay, the other key issue is marine debris, including direct fishing gear. In Indonesia is globally notorious for marine litter. They are producing a lot of litter, and that's cited in the global literature. And then it's quite sad to see. And then so Indonesia has set up a national plan, and the president promised to reduce like 70% by 2025 of the entire Indonesian marine debris. And then, 2025 is like 5 years later. I don't know how this was achieved and will be achieved. But, for the marine debris, direct fishing gears, one study showed that in Northern Territory of Australia, there are lots of accumulation of the fishing gears. And then this information is quite good, that we can see that fishing gear is actually deposited in the fishing areas, like 160 kilograms per square meter per year has been accumulated. And then this become a source of ghost fishing and then degrading the fisheries area. So we need to monitor and then remove those direct fishing gears so that we can increase the productivity of the fishing areas. In Korea, we have like 176,000 tons of marine litter generated annually in 2014. This is an assessment. And then like 67% from the land-based and 33% from the sea-based. So the government is removing the debris, and then sunken debris and direct fishing gear and shoreline debris. They are putting a lot of money to do the removing action. But how they can see that their marine litter program is actually working or not is to do the monitoring. In Korea, there are 40 monitoring stations around the country, and then local NGOs is conducting assessment bi-monthly. Actually, 6 times a year, they are conducting a marine litter monitoring. And then this is a scientific monitoring, not like NGO public awareness activity. This is a scientifically correct method of monitoring. And then we found that the trend of litter is decreasing. As you can see, in 2008 to 2016, we see the clear trend of reducing the number and the volume and weight. So actually, we are seeing the decrease of the number and volume of and weight of the marine litter. This means that our Korean's solid waste program is actually working. So, in this scientific monitoring program, we can conclude that there's something improvement going on. So without this kind of study, we cannot see how our action will be produce a result or not. So my suggestion here is that two things I can suggest. Oil spill preparedness and response cooperation is necessary at ASEA region, and developing a joint oil spill contingency plan among ASEA stakeholders, like 4 countries, a similar instrument like Gulf of Thailand among Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So as I show you here, joint statement, this partnership is necessary to mobilize resources among the countries. So what I can see is that this is a highly necessary, because Australia has resources, but the other countries has very limited resources. So we can share when the oil spill happening. And then ESI mapping and risk assessment can be done as our Indonesian colleague already showed in Northern Sumatra. And the second recommendation is that marine debris survey network at ASEA region is quite necessary, because without seeing the monitoring result, we cannot assess our policy soundness. So establish marine litter survey stations at each country for regular monitoring activities by NGOs. This is a dual purpose. One is awareness building, and second is a scientifically sound monitoring of a marine litter. And joint survey guideline and harmonized data